For centuries, Egypt was ruled by pharaohs whose monuments still dominate our image of the ancient world. But there was a period when the rulers sitting on Egypt's throne came from farther south, from the Kingdom of Kush, a powerful civilization centered in Nubia, in what is now northern Sudan and southern Egypt. They became known in modern times as the Black Pharaohs, and their story begins with a question: how did a kingdom south of Egypt come to rule Egypt itself? The answer begins in the 8th century BCE. At the time, Egypt was politically divided. Different rulers controlled different parts of the country, while powerful religious institutions held enormous influence. Far to the south, the Kingdom of Kush had become a major power of its own. Its political and religious center was at Napata, near the fourth cataract of the Nile, and one Kushite king was about to change the balance of power. His name was Piye. Piye, also known as Piye, became king of Kush around 747 BCE. During his reign, he expanded Kushite control northward into Egypt. But the campaign was not simply a march into a united country. Egypt was divided among several local rulers, and one of them, Tefnakht of Sais, had built an alliance of rulers in Lower Egypt. Piye responded by moving north. His campaign is recorded on what is now known as the Victory Stela of Piye, a monumental inscription discovered at Jebel Barkal. It describes his victories and presents his campaign as an effort to restore order under the authority of the god Amun. Eventually, Piye's forces defeated the Northern Coalition. The result was extraordinary. A ruler from Kush had established control over the Egyptian Nile Valley, and the Kushite dynasty that followed became known as Egypt's 25th dynasty. But there is something important to understand here. The Kushites did not arrive in Egypt and simply replace Egyptian culture with their own. They adopted many Egyptian religious and political traditions. They used Egyptian royal titles. They built and restored temples. They represented themselves using established Egyptian artistic conventions. But they also retained distinctive Kushite features. The rulers were not simply anonymous Egyptian kings. Their monuments and surviving objects show a combination of Egyptian traditions and Nubian identity. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, for example, notes that Kushite rulers adopted Egyptian conventions of representation while adding distinctive elements to express their Nubian character. They were ruling Egypt, but they were still rulers of Kush. And that dual identity becomes one of the most fascinating parts of their story. After Piye died, his successor Shabako continued Kushite rule. Then came another important ruler, Taharqa. Taharqa ruled during one of the most challenging periods of the dynasty. He was not simply a king trying to hold Egypt together. He was also a major builder. Temples and monuments associated with his reign appeared across Egypt and Nubia. His surviving monuments show just how deeply the Kushite rulers had integrated themselves into the religious and political world of ancient Egypt. But their greatest threat was coming from far beyond the Nile. To the northeast, the Assyrian Empire was becoming one of the most powerful states in the ancient Near East, and Egypt became entangled in the wider struggle between Assyria and the kingdoms of the Levant. Kushite rulers supported political allies who opposed Assyrian power. That brought the Assyrian army directly into conflict with Taharqa. In 671 BCE, the Assyrian king Esarhaddon invaded Egypt. Taharqa was forced to retreat, but the Kushites did not simply disappear. Taharqa returned to the struggle, and the conflict continued. Eventually, Assyrian pressure forced Kushite rulers out of Egypt. Taharqa died in 664 BCE. His successor, Tantamani, briefly regained control over parts of Egypt. But Assyrian forces returned. By the middle of the 7th century BCE, Kushite rule over Egypt had come to an end. The 25th dynasty was finished, but Kush itself was not. And this is where the story takes a turn that is often overlooked. Losing Egypt did not mean the end of the Kingdom of Kush. The kingdom continued in Nubia for centuries. Its political center eventually shifted southward. And long after the 25th dynasty had disappeared from Egypt, Kush remained a major African civilization. Its later capital at Meroë became the center of a powerful kingdom with its own pyramids, industries, writing system, and royal traditions. That's the civilization we explored in another story. But the Black Pharaohs came before Meroë's greatest period. They were the rulers who demonstrated that political power could move in the opposite direction, not from Egypt south, but from Nubia north. And there is another detail that makes their story even more remarkable. Kushite royal women played important political and religious roles. Piye's sister, Amenartis I, became God's wife of Amun at Thebes, an enormously influential religious position. She was part of the Kushite royal strategy for maintaining influence in southern Egypt. So, the Kushite presence in Egypt was not built by armies alone. It was reinforced through religion, family, politics, and monumental building. And yet, when people picture ancient Egypt today, they rarely picture Kushite rulers. They picture pyramids at Giza, Tutankhamun, Ramesses, Cleopatra. The Kushite pharaohs are much less familiar, but the evidence is still there. Their names appear on monuments. Their statues survive in museums. Their temples still stand. Their pyramids remain in Sudan, and their royal objects preserve the distinctive combination of Egyptian and Nubian traditions that define their rule. So were the Black Pharaohs simply Egyptian kings who happened to come from the south? Number. Were they completely separate from Egyptian civilization? Also no. The reality is more interesting. They were Kushite rulers from a powerful Nubian kingdom who entered Egypt during a period of political fragmentation, adopted and revived many Egyptian traditions, and ruled as pharaohs while maintaining connections to their homeland. For several generations, the throne of Egypt belonged to a dynasty whose roots lay south of the traditional heartland of Egyptian power. And when their rule ended, Kush survived. That may be the most important part of the story, because the end of the 25th dynasty was not the end of Kush. It was only the end of Kushite rule in Egypt. The kingdom that had produced the Black Pharaohs would continue for centuries, long after their dynasty had disappeared from the Egyptian throne, and the ruins they left behind are still standing today. So the next time you picture ancient Egypt, remember to look south, because for a time, the pharaoh sitting on Egypt's throne came from Kush, and the story of ancient Egypt was never only an Egyptian story. The end of Kushite rule in Egypt was not the end of Kush. It was only the end of Kushite rule in Egypt. The kingdom continued in Nubia for centuries. Its political center eventually shifted southward, and long after the 25th dynasty disappeared from the Egyptian throne, Kush remained a major African civilization. Its later capital at Meroë became the center of a powerful kingdom with its own pyramids, industries, writing system, and royal traditions. And that's where the story continues, because if you want to see what happened to Kush after its pharaohs lost Egypt, you need to look south, to Meroë. More than 200 pyramids still rise from the Sudanese desert, a writing system that remains only partially understood, and the remains of a civilization that survived for centuries after its rulers were pushed out of Egypt. So the next time you picture ancient Egypt, remember to look south. Because for a time, the pharaoh sitting on Egypt's throne came from Kush, and the story of ancient Egypt was never only an Egyptian story. If you want to discover what happened to Kush after Egypt, watch our documentary on Meroë next. The link is on your screen. And subscribe to Northern Archive for more forgotten civilizations, hidden engineering, and the African history that deserves to be remembered.